All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining me for this Accountability in Government webinar. First, I just want to ask if you could maybe send me a quick little note in the chat box just to ensure on my screen it appears that everybody should be hearing me correctly. But if you could please just send me a note to say that the audio is fine and working for you, that would be great. Also, just wanted to touch base and let you know we're going to be moving fairly quickly through this because my intent was to try and provide a lot of content and insight into this. So please bear with me while we go a little quickly, and I hope you'll stay with my pace. So I've set a little stopwatch here, so I'm well aware of my time. So I'm going to start with a little agenda, just an introduction as to what the premise of this is and who I am, who DOOR is, and why we're talking on this topic. Give some examples of accountability in government. Then we'll talk about positive accountability and best practices, what that kind of looks like. Give you a bit of a case study for accountability in government, and then also talk about some recommendations or some shifts that should happen. So one of the things I would really like to emphasize in here is that it is my intent to be non-partisan and to be non-political. I have my own political views. I don't want them to filter into my work whatsoever. So the examples that I'm going to draw are just examples that I've seen and noticed and that we'll be able to use for conversation. So who we are, DOOR International, or DOOR Training and Consulting, is my company. It is a global franchise concept present in about 55 countries around the world. Because of our work in providing leadership and management development and training to large global enterprises around the world, we have signed a license with Partners in Leadership to be the exclusive representative around the world. So that makes me the exclusive representative for their training on accountability in Canada, which, as you can see by some of those logos, has been very broadly recognized as really the best content in its space. It's won basically the gold awards for having the best digital tools to support our accountability methods, languages, models, practices, etc., and tons of, I don't want to get into a big sales pitch at the moment, but just a huge pedigree of clients where we've done some really amazing work. So this body of work is kind of focused upon 3 tracks to creating greater accountability. So you might be familiar with the Oz principle. So the Oz principle was the original book on organizational accountability that came out in 1994. It's been a best-selling book every year since. It is basically the kind of the original standard. In fact, in 1994, when it came out, it was the only book you would find on organizational accountability. So I can say that I work with the people who very literally wrote the books on organizational accountability. So the Oz principle is the basis for our self track, which is taking personal accountability within a corporate or organizational context. The culture track is based on the book Change the Culture, Change the Game. Since that one came out, that's the more recent of the 3. That is the basis for the building an accountable culture track. It really kind of lays out some of the ideas of our robust culture transition process. And it has been a top leadership book ever since it has come out. And then our basis for what we call the others track is how did that happen is the title, and it's really how do you hold others accountable. So when there are substantial deliverables that we need to make sure happens, how do we make sure that they happen? So let me step into some examples. We have people that do research constantly on when accountability comes up in the news. I have a Google alert and whatnot, so I watch for these different things. So what I have seen, maybe some of you are familiar with this in Alberta, we've had a number of changes of premiers in the past while, but back when Jim Prentice took over, one of the things that he needed to do was to distinguish himself differently from his predecessor, and so he was introducing an Accountability Act, and at the bottom here I've noted how he said he will enforce the rules with vigor, and then went on to talk about how repercussions and transgressions would be handled, and anybody who breaks the rules could face termination. So it's an interesting approach to accountability, which is really enforcement. Then, basically, within Alberta, we had then a subsequent change of government again, and then we have what I would call Accountability 2.0, which it's interesting is that, back at this at this time when this Accountability Act was introduced, there was somebody in opposition, leader of the NDP party. Her name was Rachel Notley, and she said actually a very memorable line. She said that Accountability Act was all hat and no cattle, which in Alberta would be something people would really take well to. So later on, change of government, change of regime, they pledged transparency and accountability in a different way, and actually have now created a special ethics and accountability committee, which is has participants from multi-parties. This was something else that I found interesting. This was in British Columbia, so I don't live in British Columbia. I was not familiar with the details of this, but this was reactive. This is an opposition party introducing measures to make government more open and accountable. Really, sometimes, obviously, in a political sphere, this is to really demonstrate that, hey, we would be better in governance than somebody else presently is. And so this report, basically, they're talking about a report that blamed everyone else, and nobody seemed to have records of the decision that caused several people to lose their jobs, and sadly one to take their own life. So this was a little bit of an example of how that was mishandled. This was related to the health ministry. So Firing's review was called an accountability gong show. It's sad. Sometimes when these types of things happen is that there is collateral damage. When accountability is approached like a sword, then it's kind of like doing an autopsy on the living, and then there's collateral damage to healthy parts of it. This is a story that is in the city of Edmonton that I was actually quite familiar with because I have some history with this. So the city manager in the city of Edmonton, his name was Simon Farbrother, and how I know him is that I helped organize somebody to do a keynote speech on accountability at the city of Edmonton, and I can tell you that Simon Farbrother was very much a champion of accountability. So accountability was very important to what he tried to communicate, what he tried to do. In fact, I did a little bit of a pilot with a group. One of the things that I remember was I asked everybody in the room, there were over 30 people in the room, how often do you hear about accountability? And the unanimous answer was every single day. So they had this metro line, which, to make a long story short, involved something like an LRT line that ended up being seriously, substantially delayed. And as you can see, these are little snippets of headlines. The first one, Metro Line contract was plagued by mismanagement, lack of communication. They did an auditor's report to find all the problems that happened with the signaling contract that caused these delays. And then when these delays happened, it was a firestorm. If you lived in the city of Edmonton, you would know that this was front page news for the summer of 2015, at least in August. City council was very irate. How did this delay happen? Basically the title of one of those books that we use. How did that happen? So at some point, the city manager, congruent to his integrity, he said, I will take full accountability. I'm your only employee. The results of that, you can see at the bottom, was that he was ultimately let go. So in the end, we've basically, found somebody to kind of take the blame. We let him go. And I'll kind of go into a little bit more of that story a little bit later. This is an example. This is about the crisis in Flint, Michigan, about water quality. This one personally really upsets me tremendously. I don't want to get into it, but really what's important here is that there are things that just should never happen and boundaries that just should never be crossed. And so how do we institutionalize that and make sure that there's good governance and accountability, not for when something has gone wrong, but to ensure that things do not go wrong? Here's an example of accountability that nobody wants. In this particular case, this was an article that happened in Calgary. The hacker group, Anonymous, actually organized this particular demonstration. And it was a number of people coming out to demonstrate their dissatisfaction, how upset they are with the number of children in the care of the government. So this would be like foster children, the number of children in the care of government that died in the care of government, basically. So very worthy cause. Nobody can certainly blame them for wanting to draw attention to this very important issue. However, when I watched this video, this news clip, and they interviewed somebody, the person said, well, we want somebody to be held accountable to this. And you can see the quote at the bottom from the article, nobody wants to be held accountable. So here's why it's accountability that nobody wants. If I were to then go anywhere in the government or anywhere in the public and say, raise your hands if you will accept accountability or be accountable for the death of children in care of the government, who is really going to want to raise their hand? Nobody wants to take on that accountability. Who wants to wear that? Nobody. But if instead you were to reframe it and say, who wants to assure the safety of children in care? Everybody will raise their hand. We have the same kind of issue with accountability coming up with missing and murdered Aboriginal women. It's the same kind of conversation. People want somebody to be accountable. Who's going to wear this? And who really wants to wear it? That, hey, I helped contribute to the death of children or Aboriginal women. Nobody wants to wear that. But instead, if you say, let's all be individually and mutually accountable for the safety and well-being of children, Aboriginal women, of everybody, of water quality, of whatever the case might be, then we get everybody to raise their hands. That's a different approach. This is an example that I wanted to put up here because I think this is a better approach. This comes from the Transportation Safety Board. So I was looking at their presentation. As you can imagine, every time there is an incident of a plane crash, skids off a runway, hits something, people get hurt, Transportation Safety Board gets involved because they need to ensure the safety well-being of air passengers everywhere. So what they have here in the second bullet point is organizational accountability is the key. And what I'd like to draw your attention to is what they kind of say at the bottom is that true accountability is about more than just blame and retrain or firing the bad apples. It is about looking forward and requires organizations and professions to take full responsibility to fix identified problems. So-called near-miss incidents must be viewed as free opportunities for organizational learning. People will only report if they feel safe to do so. This is absolutely critical, and one of the aspects of things that we teach in our accountability training is if we are looking for bad apples, if we are looking for people to wear and to hold the blame, we are not going to get ultimately the results we are striving to do. It's not sustainable, and it requires a different level of effort, which I'll kind of go through. But if we really want to ensure that something doesn't happen, we need to create safety to say that near misses and mistakes are things that we learn from. There's an infamous story, I can't remember which book it was, about an executive who made some kind of error and he cost the company $10 million. And so he was, I think, the COO, and he was called into the CEO's office. And the CEO, when he approached the CEO, he said, I guess you're going to be asking for my resignation. And the CEO's answer was, wisely, no, we just invested $10 million in your training. There's no way we're going to let you go. So that kind of experience actually creates a whole different belief system and a whole different approach just to what happens in the organization. Again, we'll go into that a little bit more. There is something within, especially the government public service realm, called results-based accountability. And it's really performance measurement that starts with an end in mind, which might be initially identified as something a little bit vague, like or less clear, like we're going to improve recreational access for citizens, or we're going to improve roads to reduce commute times. So it starts with those ends, and then results-based accountability creates performance measures to look at quality and efficiency of services, which they consider the means that contribute to achieving the desired result, which is the end, on a community scale. So again, that's a good intention, well-intended approach. So some accountability, using all of these examples that I've now presented to you, there are some accountability intentions that are negative. Sometimes accountability comes forward is, we're going to make somebody pay. Sometimes because it's a political sphere in when we're dealing with government, one party wants to make somebody else pay politically. or sometimes the people want to see somebody pay. That example that I used about the death of children in care, the person that was interviewed obviously was deeply impacted. I don't know if they had a personal investment in this, but they want to see somebody pay. So sometimes that's an intention that's really negative, not helpful. Making sure that it isn't you. So obviously if you make somebody else pay and then you look innocent in the process, that's a bit of a negative intention. There's a battle sometimes for who's the most righteous, who is the best standard bearer, who is the best person, who has the best integrity, who has the best ethics, who's the best governance model. So we try to make ourselves look better than somebody else by making them look bad, and basically blaming and putting, negative accountability on somebody else. So we want to make others appear irresponsible and immoral. We sacrifice others. I'm sure you've heard the phrase throwing somebody under the bus. It's very common, especially in a political sphere. And one side's made to appear better at the expense of the other. So those are intentions. I use the word intentions very specifically because when people use accountability as their flag that they're waving, sometimes, their intentions are really negative. They want to improve their situation, but doing so at the expense of somebody else. Then there are accountability intentions that are positive, because accountability in itself, is not just a bad thing. There are positive things people want to create. So there's people looking to create transparency and integrity and ethics, right? So things should be open. Things should be transparent. We should be able to have right to information, right? So if we're not hiding things and there's no hidden agenda, then we create transparency. And if we're above board, we create transparency. And if we are doing our best, we create transparency. So those are all positive intentions around accountability. We want to seek good governance models. So some of the things that accountability legislation and accountability acts and accountability measures all seek to do is to try and create good governance. We want to create fairness and equity in the process as far as procurement processes and best practices in project management and whatever. Quite often ensuring morality, decency, and honesty is to make sure that there's fairness. So, for example, when you look at the whole Senate expense scandal that we've been dealing with and are dealing with again in the news now in Canada, people look at things like that and they say, well, we have a gap with morality, decency, honesty. So we want to ensure morality, decency, honesty. We want people to be accountable. But sadly, sometimes the way we look for that to happen is, again, to call for somebody's head, to call for somebody to be sacrificed, for somebody to be thrown under the bus. When instead what we really want to do is we want to institutionalize morality, decency, and honesty. So those are positive things that we want to try and get to. We want to deliver good value for public funds. If we're investing taxpayer dollars for any particular project, set of projects, number of outcomes, we want to give them good value. As the public, as citizens, we desire and demand that. And as, good governance people, as people in the civil service, whether we are elected or whether we are in the public, working for the public service, we want to provide good value for public funds. And we also want to ensure consequences for non-delivery and important failures. And again, I don't think that's necessarily a negative intention. It's a positive intention, not intended to penalize and to harm people, but just to make sure that there are consequences, that we have certain outcomes. So now I'm going to get into some of the content that we work with, kind of talk to you about and share some ideas and some thoughts around accountability and moving towards positive accountability and best practices. So we talk about the typical accountability question, which is, who is accountable for failing to achieve the result? So this is typically about blame. Something went wrong. We didn't meet a certain target. We didn't meet a certain outcome. We didn't meet a certain deadline. Looking at the City of Edmonton example, who is accountable for failing to achieve the result? Well, then the city manager says, I'm accountable. And so that becomes, he's the one who shoulders then all of the blame. However, I can tell you, I know for a fact that he single-handedly did not create this outcome. There's a whole number of complicit people and departments and processes and culture behind all of that. He's the one who took the accountability, took the blame, but that's the typical question, is who's accountable for failing to achieve the result or achieving a result, like the example of death of children in care or water quality, creating a result that clearly is unacceptable. Whereas the Oz principle accountability question is, who is accountable for achieving the result? This is personal, individual, and mutual accountability. So if we want to create the safety of children in care of the government, who is accountable for achieving that result? And the short answer for that is everybody. If you look at the Transportation Safety Board example of that, who is accountable for achieving the result of people being able to fly safely on, every single flight that they're on? Well, the Transportation Safety Board, if they took an approach where they just looked to blame, sacrifice, throw somebody under the bus whenever there was an incident, how much do you think they would ultimately improve safety of everybody on a plane? I can tell you I've actually had the opportunity to spend some time inside a flight simulator where they share data from all kinds of flights, including flights that ended in tragedy so people can learn from them, but also flights that had some very near misses to help train people how differently and how better to deal with the similar circumstances, so that one thing that avoided a tragedy because you had a really excellent, proficient pilot who just happened to do the right things, that can be trained and placed into that capability, can be transferred to every single person. So the dictionary definition of accountability supports what a lot of people take as their approach to accountability, which is subject to having to report, explain, or justify, responsible, answerable. So we are often looking for people to be answerable. But what is it that we really, really want? Do we really just want people to, take blame, shoulder blame, and to pay the price when things don't work out? Or do we really just want hands on the wheel, get the job done? For the Transportation Safety Board's role, we want every single pilot, every single airline, every single employee of every airline to be fully accountable for the safety of passengers in their care, period. And that's the flight control staff, that's everybody. We want everybody within a municipality, whoever it is, whether they're in water services or some other department, we want everybody to be accountable for safe drinking water. We want everybody in the government to be accountable for the safety and well-being of children in the care of the government. That's what we really want. We just want the job done right. We want people to step up and to be wholly accountable, not just at the top, but at the front line, because the minister of, in Alberta, we have the Minister of Human Services. So it's not just the Minister of Human Services that should be accountable. It's every single foster parent. It's every single social worker that looks into every single foster home. It has to be all the way through. So accountability that is enforced with vigor, and I put that in quotes because that was Jim Prentice's quote. Accountability that throws somebody under the bus, looks for scapegoats, gets people fired, points a giant finger of blame. That is what I call accountabilitying. So that's a phrase that I kind of made up. You can feel free to use that. But the reason why I came up with that was I was doing some work with a government, and I know that within a government as well as in companies, one of the issues that they were dealing with is workplace bullies. These type of people exist, and they cause tremendous stress. They cause tremendous cost upon our system in results and in stress leave and medical leave and all kinds of things, and we really don't want to go there. However, if we're using these kinds of accountability, we are quite literally arming these workplace bullies with just bigger bats to go around and to champion the cause of accountability and to basically empower their workplace bullying. So the Oz principle definition of accountability, what we teach in our self-track and in the book called the Oz principle, it's a personal choice to rise above one's circumstances and demonstrate the ownership necessary for achieving key results, to see it, to own it, to solve it, and to do it. So I'll explain that in a little more. But the key choice is it's a personal responsibility. If you are imposing accountability upon somebody, that only works. That's sort of like putting your hand around somebody's throat. It only works as long as your hands are there, as long as the pressure is being applied. If you walk away, you want something that is sustainable. You want something that is self-sustainable. And this definition, what we want to achieve is personal accountability. It's a personal choice. We want to get people to personally choose to rise above their circumstances, demonstrate the ownership necessary for achieving key results. In every one of those examples of things that have gone wrong, of things that have gone off the rails, there are, when you look back at them in hindsight, there are things that people could have done where they could have spoken up, they could have done something differently. The culture maybe might have been aligned to get the results that they got. However, if we can get people to be self-accountable and to create and institute that into the culture, then we empower people to basically create and drive the type of results that we're looking for. It's positive accountability. So we say that when it comes to getting things done, if you don't get accountability right, you probably won't get anything else right. Accountability, in our view, it permeates absolutely everything. It permeates our relationships, of how we make commitments and keep commitments to each other, of how we get things done, of what we're actually going to get done, of how focused and engaged and motivated we are. So accountability is really, for us, when we've kind of framed this, we leverage accountability to be, it's an absolute game changer. Again, in that one book title, Change the Culture, Change the Game. When you change the culture and you create accountability within the culture, or a culture of accountability, it's a serious game changer. People walk out with a completely different view of how they engage with each other, how they commit to each other, and how they handle what arises. So one of the premises that we talk about in our accountability training is accountability begins by clearly defining the results. What is it we are out to achieve? And so when you look at results-based accountability, one of the challenges that it tries to help address is it takes things that are unclear, so these idealistic maybe outcomes that we're trying to achieve or impact we're trying to make, and it tries to create it into measures that get people working along that way. Our premise, however, is accountability begins by clearly defining the results. It's really like, to use a sports metaphor, it's how do you define winning? Everybody has a favorite sport. In your favorite sport, you can tell exactly what it takes to score a point, and you know exactly what it takes to win. Score more of these points than somebody else, right? So accountability is telling people what defines winning in our government, in our business unit, in our ministry, in our part of the government, whatever. But what are the results? What are we looking to achieve? What defines winning? So we ask people, are these key results clearly defined and understood throughout your organization? So I'm going to provide some insight from some research. There's a Partners in Leadership Workplace Accountability Study that took place from 2011 to 2013. Actually, they continue to solicit more input. However, one of the things is they ask people these types of questions. So this is from broad set of organizations. This is not specific to government. However, I'll kind of talk a little bit about where I think the differences might be within government. Are key results clearly defined and understood? If you were to think about that question in your government department, in your realm of sphere of influence, are they clearly understood? 86% said no. Key results, key outcomes, what defines winning is not clearly defined and understood. And then we ask the question, do priorities change frequently, creating confusion around the key results? So the key results and what we are setting out to do at the start of the year, start of the fiscal year, or whatever you want to use, does that stay or does it change? Are there priority changes? I would hazard to say that this number, which you'll see in a second, is 84% said yes. I would think that number would probably be even higher within government, just because it's, by definition, a politically driven workplace, and priorities do very much change. So we talk about activity and results. And I would always ask people in a workshop, does all activity create results? And a number of people will shout out, no. And when I pause and don't say anything, then people will say, well, yes, they do. Yes, all activity leads to results. The results are the desired and undesired outcomes of taking actions, or quite frankly, taking inaction. So one of the things we try to change, it's a paradigm shift, is instead of just focusing on doing the job, because if I were to ask you, I'm sure every one of your organizations has job descriptions, right? So people are focused on doing their job. In fact, Quite often, a lot of the HR function and roles and responsibilities are all about supporting people in their job. Whereas the leader, the elected officials, and the top civil servants, they are focused on outcomes, results. So how do we translate that to get every single person aligned to and contributing to achieving the result as opposed to just their job? So here are some of the limitations of that. If we have these three people and they have a very specific job and the box kind of defines their boundaries of what is and what isn't their job in their job description or in their job responsibility, you can see clearly things will fall through the cracks. So then quite often, well, we hire more people to take on more roles so that less things fall through the cracks. But inevitably, things still continue to fall through the cracks, and so then we hire more people. So that hopefully less things fall through the cracks, but still you can see there are cracks. We can't possibly define every single scenario and circumstance that can arise. So the power of joint accountability is getting people to become accountable for bigger outcomes and objectives, to not just focus on their job, but achieving the result and doing their job become one and the same. So we are self and mutually accountable for achieving these bigger results. And then we get and achieve results that we are not now achieving. That's one of the power of accountability. In this, I'm going to introduce, this is a model that we use. We call it the results pyramid. We use this in all of our accountability training. This is a really simple model. Once I show it to you once, you can probably remember this for life. But this model can help me diagnose everything that is happening anywhere in any culture. I can use this model and tell you exactly what's happening in your culture anywhere, anytime. However, I can also use this model to prescribe what needs to happen in order to create a specific shift and to create a different result. So we say at the top of this that results are at the top of the pyramid. So you are getting results, good results, bad results, indifferent results. You're always getting results. So your results are what you're getting today. Your results are a product of the actions that people are taking, whether those are good actions, focused actions, inaction, whatever, but actions are creating our results. Underneath actions, the actions that we are taking are based upon our beliefs. So the beliefs that we hold drive our actions. And this is, I'll get into that a little more. And then it's our experiences that create our beliefs that drive our actions that get us the results. And this is individually and also collectively. And then we put in this little plane here to suggest that this is what we call the leadership trap, is that you can solve problems dealing with things at an actions level. However, that won't be sustainable. That's like, as long as your foot is on the pedal, you are continuing to cruise down the highway. But as soon as you take off your foot off the pedal, you decelerate, right? So you can, and because government is quite often a regulated environment and mindset to start with, government especially is really focused on this plane above, on these levels above the plane, actions and results. So this is where we implement, we're not getting the results we want or things are happening. So we create bylaws, we create new processes, we create new governance, we create this and that. So just to give you an example, in the city of Edmonton example, I read the auditor's report. It had some recommendations, and sorry, I wish I had them in front of me. I could quote you them verbatim, but one of them was to follow project management best practices that they had already prescribed to. So basically, what that says is we've had these project management best practices. We have not been following them. Our recommendation is to make sure that we follow them. One of the other recommendations is to escalate something that could become politically challenging or difficult in the public view, as though nobody ever thought of that before. That's really quite surprising. So when we implement things at an actions level, we create some change and we will get some success a certain percentage of the time. But it's not really sustainable. The sustainable part is when we really focus on below this leadership trap on beliefs. So for example, the Transportation Safety Board wants to create a belief in people's view that it is safe to bring some near misses forward. if somebody had a near miss, and let's say I was a pilot and this was my fault, I made this mistake. If I came forward with this to say, oh my gosh, I almost missed this and it could have been tragic. If the experience that I'm given is that I'm now reprimanded and I'm in trouble and I'm taken off rotation and whatever else, that experience creates in me and everybody around me, because I will share that at a water cooler, the belief that it's not safe to bring forward instances. If somebody sees that a project is not on track, if somebody is seeing that there are challenges within something, we need to create experiences that drive the beliefs that say, hey, this is acceptable to bring forward. Failure is acceptable. We need to bring this up. Even if the result was tragic, if one child died in care, nobody really wants to own the responsibility of that, but we do need to make it safe for people to talk about what really happened. What is the learning that we really need to do? That's the premise from which the Transportation Safety Board really needs to work from. So in this, the circle really demonstrates the area in which culture resides. So the culture within any organization or any government department is happening at this level. People are talking at the water cooler about things that happened, about there could be deliverables that we were supposed to give. Some people were held accountable, some people were not. Some people were given a pass, some people were not. Sometimes people have excuses and we permit them. Sometimes we have excuses and they're not permitted. All of these things are experiences that help drive beliefs. And the key difference is, I can tell you what I want you to believe. I can tell you as your leader that I want you to approach me with any problem, with any challenge that you have. That's a belief, or any suggestion, quite frankly, that you have. But if I give you an experience that when you come to me with a problem or a suggestion and I blow you off or I dismiss your suggestion, I give you a powerful experience that, our research shows people only need 2 experiences, and they don't even have to be personal experiences. They can be vicarious experiences that they've heard from somebody else. It only takes 2 experiences to institutionalize a specific belief that will then drive every action that they take from there forward, which is going to create the results. So this is a really powerful pyramid. So we talk about a culture of accountabilities where we really want to institutionalize accountability and create a culture where people take accountability to think and act in the manner necessary to achieve results and to create our desired outcomes. We also, in our training, we would talk about and help people frame their mind around this concept, an accountability gap. It's the difference between what people are actually doing, so this is what's actually happening, versus what we need people doing or what needs to happen that's impacting our ability to achieve results. So these gaps, if you think of this as an accountability gap, this is a very empowering way to look at and diagnose what's happening. Man, I wish we had something this kind of clear and powerful for diagnosing and helping our own health. But this is really from an organizational health perspective, looking at what people are doing versus what we need them to be doing. And then recognizing that's an accountability gap. And again, who is accountable for these gaps? Who is accountable for achieving the result? The short answer would be everybody. So we kind of look at accountability gaps at 3 different levels, and that's why we also have 3 different tracks of accountability training. There's individual accountability gaps, there's team accountability gaps, and there's organizational accountability gaps. And what this really ties into is what we call our steps to accountability model. So above the line, here's basically where we get results. Below the line, you can see when these things are happening, when we're playing the blame game, we're not getting our desired results. Below the line, when we're, when we're playing below the line, we're also not in control. We are subject to things that are happening to us or around us, as opposed to above the line, we are basically assuming control and taking control. Below the line, we are being acted upon, or we're waiting to be acted upon. So we're not taking action, whereas above the line, we are taking actions upon our circumstances and upon ourselves to create and drive the result we're looking for. Below the line, we're feeling victim. We're a victim. We're powerless. Whereas when we go above the line, we are empowered. So we play this blame game when we do our accountability training. And just for the sake of time, I'm going to go over this really quickly, but these are all things in our steps to accountability that we go through. I can find examples of this everywhere. In fact, without fail, I can go into any organization, play this little game, and have everybody in any organization, I bet dollars to donuts I could do this even at Google, to find people playing the blame game and, covering their tail, which in a political environment, for example, happens a lot. When you have accountabilities, we almost are driving people to cover your tail. When accountability is a negative thing, we're causing people to be finger pointing so that they are not the one thrown under the bus. Wait and see is kind of waiting for circumstances to change and looking for something to turn around, or maybe their manager or their leader is going to change, or the direction is going to change, or the political environment is going to change. So I don't really need to work on it now. I can just wait and see how things turn out. Ignore, deny is people saying, well, some of the great examples that I've heard is, it's not my pay grade. I didn't know. I missed the meeting. I was not in the loop. I think that's the one I like the most that I've heard. Confusion, tell me what to do, are really kind of people saying, I'm helpless, I don't know what to do. And especially when you have a workplace bully or a command and control type of leader, you actually create a lot of this type of behavior. Well, just tell me what to do. I will just do whatever you tell me to do. But that is the absolute antithesis of self-accountability. So what we ultimately want to create is sustainable accountability at an individual level. It's not my job, again, is a simple one, because by definition, what's not in my job description is clearly not my job. It's somebody else's job. You cannot blame me for something that did not happen. That was not my job. So we would play this game and go through all kinds of examples, and it's always fun when we do it. And then we usually show some examples in funny little pictures of where somebody came across something and didn't really take accountability. Clearly moving that tree is not part of my responsibility. And, hey, it's not my job description to make sure that the lines are aligned by the time we're done and finished moving grates too. So the steps to accountability that we use, which is kind of one of our key models in creating self-accountability, it relates to the metaphor of the Wizard of Oz. So the Wizard of Oz actually just went to see the Broadway show in Calgary. It's still on, I think, for another night, tonight and tomorrow. Then it moves, I think, on to Edmonton. Anyway, that and the movie was rated to be one of the most popular movies of all time, The Wizard of Oz. So really having the courage of the lion to see it, own it, is having the heart of the woodsman, basically, to really take ownership, having the brains of the straw man to solve problems and come up with a plan. And like Dorothy ultimately represents do it, which is where ultimately she just had to click her heels to get back to Kansas. The premise of this is in the story The Wizard of Oz, everybody goes looking for a wizard, some magical, all-knowing guy who knows the answers to these problems, who's seen it before, is going to give them some cure and help solve their problems. But the short answer is there is no wizard. The wizard is a fraud. If you're going to do it, you've got to do it yourself. Or as my father used to say, if it's going to be, it's up to me. We would go through and we would talk about best practices around each of these steps to accountability. I'm not going to spend time on it now just because we're running short of time, but these are things that we can assess to see how they are within organizations, and particularly where there's maybe some particularly chronic weaknesses that are impacting our ability to execute and get results. The see it question is really, what's the reality I most need to acknowledge? What's really happening here? This is getting the full perspective, getting feedback from people on a regular, continuous basis. So in this workplace accountability study, we asked people about how well people in the organization see it. So 20% said people constantly seek and offer feedback. And that's interestingly high. I don't know who all participated in this study, but I can tell you that when I ask 1,000 people, when do you get feedback? 950 out of 1,000 people would tell me it's either when things go wrong, which is what 64% of the people here say, or the other answer I get is at our annual performance review. So if it was not for an annual performance review, some people would rarely, if ever, get feedback. So the own it question is, how am I contributing to the problem and or solution? So if I'm not acting upon something that I see is not right, I'm kind of complicit. I can call myself an innocent bystander, and I can go below the line and say it's not my job to address or to solve or to fix that. But if I'm an observer and I'm aware of an accountability gap, and I see that this is something that's happening, but it's clearly not what we need to have happen to get the result, then I'm contributing in some way either to the problem and or solution, or I need to be, which is really kind of the key thing. So when we ask about how well people own it, 30% said, hey, we have the necessary level of engagement and ownership. Again, I think that's high. I think particularly in government, you might see that this number is more towards one of these bottom two, which is, where achieving desired results is in jeopardy, right? Our ability to execute is impacted or threatened because of a lack of engagement and ownership. And 9%, well, these are people that have, quite frankly, just given up. We would also in training talk about these levels of ownership, and clearly the top level of ownership is buy-in and invest, where people agree and they are involved in what it is we're trying to do and they are contributing towards it. The solve it question, this is a really powerful question, especially if we can get people asking it all the time, is what else can I do? And the premise of this is we will be faced with obstacles. Things will not always go our way. In fact, you can almost predict and count upon that, as Murphy's Law would attest. So when it comes to solving it, 27% said people are creative and fully engaged in solving problems. Again, I think in government it'd probably be much more in this middle or bottom category where, almost half of the people get stuck really quickly on problems and obstacles that arise. So how to deal with this obstacle is not in my job description. It's not been articulated. I haven't been trained on it. We can have all kinds of below the line reasons why we don't solve problems, but we get stuck and then we wait for somebody else to tell us what to do and we remain below the line, right? And then fully 27% say, well, when a problem arises, it's not my job. Somebody else, my leader, my manager is supposed to fix it for me. Then the do it question is really all about execution. What am I accountable to do by when? So, in one of our, especially in our others track training, we say we will absolutely hold people accountable for the things that they have agreed to do. And that's really one of the key things is, again, if you are enforcing accountability or imposing accountability on somebody, and not more with like the Oz definition where they've made a personal choice to be accountable, you're always having to add pressure. But if you can create self-accountability, and then they are asking, what am I accountable to do by when? Then you'll have flawless execution. In this workplace accountability study, how well people do it. So 28% say that despite challenges arise, we follow through, we execute. However, 61% say that execution is an issue we need to improve on in order to be successful. Ask yourself within your organization, how great is your execution towards achieving, especially key organizational results? And 11% said it's a major flaw, like it's a serious weakness. So we have this, in our self-track training, we would use this SOSD, which is short for our See It, Own It, Solve It, Do It accountability tool. It's a process that we teach to take an accountability gap, which again is a difference between what is happening versus what we need to have happening in order to get the result. Apply this process, the SOSD tool, to really understand what is actually happening, how are we contributing to the problem or solution, to brainstorm and to engage people, because there's no end, like with some creativity and some things we teach, there are no end of resources for us to help solve and overcome problems that are accessible to everybody, especially in this day and age, in this internet age. And then to come up with a plan, right? What's the plan as to what am I are we accountable to do by when? One of the key challenges with this is quite often people don't follow these steps. They hear about a problem and then they immediately go to solve it. They don't really look at the reality. So let me give you an example that struck me recently. I saw an article that said that the education system is failing the Native population. It showed some statistics on reserve, but also in the city, of how Native graduation rates are dramatically lower than other people's graduation rates. And so the federal government, don't want to get political, but said, man, this is bad. We need to throw a bunch of money at it. And so they make some announcement. $2.3 billion goes flying out the door to help solve this problem. But the challenge that I have with that is, what is the reality we need to acknowledge? What's really, really happening on the ground? We throw money at circumstances. We tell people what to do, but it's ultimately everybody at the front line, because you can be the Prime Minister of Canada, the Premier of a province, you can be the Minister of Education, you could be an area, like you can be whoever you want, superintendent of a school division, but ultimately you need to engage the front line. Those people need to be bought in. Those people need to take ownership. Those people need to see it, own it, solve it, and do it. That's what's actually going to create the traction and the difference. So you need to engage them in the solution. You can't just throw money at it, tell them what to do, expect them to take ownership of it, and create the desired result. So we're absolutely not creating accountability. Sadly, we'll throw a bunch of money at it. Some point down the road, we'll see, hey, we're not getting the results that we wanted for the money we threw at it. And then quite often the result is we're looking for somebody to take the blame or accountability to get the result. I'm going to just skip over this. This is really some of our culture information, but to say if presently you're achieving an R1, that's your current results, and you're looking to move towards a new set of results, then basically there's a shift in your culture that needs to occur, different set of actions, beliefs, and experiences, which is the culture, to drive that new set of results. So we have a very robust cultural transition framework. And one of the things we look to do is to change the alignment where people are in silos, where people are separated. We instead want to get them aligned. So that becomes really important. Again, these are some of our culture transition methods, formal methods that we have, as well as informal methods. We have some of the formal methods are focused feedback, focused storytelling, focused recognition, focused accountability. Be happy to go into that in a little more detail with you if you choose. But some of the specific challenges in government around accountability are political interference. So I see and I hear this quite a bit. There's going to be a change in government, or let's say an elected official kind of gets involved in something that's happening at the civil service level. And next thing you know, they're interfering, or they're creating influence, they're changing priorities, or they're changing focus. They're kind of looking at the trade winds of popularity, and sometimes that changes things. We create silos between business units or ministries and departments. We're not sharing resources. We're not working collectively. There's mobility, transferability of people, I think, is one of the issues that I see quite a bit, where people can transfer into different departments, ministries, business units. And so the problem quite often gets moved with those individuals and doesn't really get properly dealt with. One of the things I hear quite often is people say, wow, we have a union, we have seniority rules, and we've got a performance process that people can kind of skirt. And so those are challenges that happen with how do you create a culture of accountability. Then there's, of course, partisanship at the elected officials level, where people are playing the blame game, throwing money at the problem, as I mentioned before. Flavor of the month, where people are cynical that this is truly something we're going to implement and stick with, as opposed to something that's just sort of politically expedient for now. Here's a huge one. This is the way we've always done it. This is a huge impediment to creating some of the changes and solutions that are needed for government to change in necessary ways in our current time. There are cultural barriers to speaking up. Again, using that results pyramid model, where people have had the experience where somebody else spoke up and they got hammered for it, right? Or it hurt them, or we don't allow mistakes. So here's a story. This is a picture of, this was a project I was actually involved in, somewhere hidden way up in the top left of that corner, but we were working with the Department of Public Works and Highways. So this is a federal department in the Philippines government that for the country of 100 million people, this department is wholly responsible for every single road, bridge that gets built, every flood mitigation project. So it's a huge department across the country of the Philippines and widely distributed across many islands. The Asian Development Bank funded this initiative because they saw it as being really valuable. You'll see in the middle there's a sheik-like looking person kind of close to the middle, and on his left, this is the secretary of the department. So this is a political appointee, sort of like John Kerry is a political appointee of Barack Obama. This person runs the department. And one of the things that they were especially looking to do was to institutionalize accountability and good governance. So we went through the top leadership team, all the area regional directors, the assistant directors, the regional engineers. I think there was 255 leaders in total that we worked with. And this was really key, is the secretary personally demonstrated and showed that this is as important as anything they are doing. And when you talk about political interference, this was one of the things that came up quite often in the workshops. The Philippines is undergoing an election process right now, this year, as is the United States. And so they know that the political landscape might change, the results that people are looking to do might change, but if they can institutionalize accountability across this department, that's their greatest asset that they can give to any new government. Whoever the new government is, whether they keep the secretary or whether they appoint a different secretary, it's kind of irrelevant because the secretary is institutionalized and created a culture of accountability within that department that will supersede the political influence, because ultimately now they have a vehicle that even if the priorities do change, they have a way to help ensure that they get the results. So one of the things that really struck me from this memory was there was a person in there who was responsible for road safety, obviously, Department of Highways. And so when we went through this one workshop, things you can do to contribute substantially to the key results of the organization. He came up with something that he called 5 for Lives. So we facilitated this process. It's called 5 for Lives, and basically is a whole entire plan of who all needed to be engaged and how to hold them accountable, which is part of what we facilitate. And 5 steps that if we would implement these 5 steps, we could make a measurable difference of saving X number, forgive me, I don't remember the number, of X many lives. So this is a really phenomenal thing. For me, every single week I think of this group and I think of that individual because I know that I had a role in helping to facilitate something that is going to save hundreds of lives every single year within the Philippines because this person took accountability for something that wasn't even, quite frankly, in his job description. His job description had certain, roles and responsibilities, but this was a contribution that he chose to make, that he basically made himself accountable to his superiors right up to the secretary level to say, this is the contribution I'm going to make. And of course, safety wasn't even actually one of their key results, quite honestly, but it clearly is a boundary, and it is something that is kind of a non-negotiable, something that everybody wants to see. So that was a beautiful example of where they created accountability. So they have a language and a model of accountability for everybody within the department. This is something that the next step is they're going to start rolling this out to everybody on the front line. Of course, they have to wait a little bit of time to see how things will be impacted by the change in government and by the election. So really some of the shifts that we want to create, or did create in this case, is clarity of results. So everybody there knows clearly what the Department of Public Works and Highways is there to achieve, what constitutes winning for them. We created boundaries. We shift from what's unacceptable to what's expected. One of the things in the Philippines that you can maybe appreciate is there's what's the word I'm looking for? There's corruption that happens quite often where people get paid off. This is a key thing that they really needed to address. So we've set some very clear boundaries and incorporated that into the culture of accountability that is part of everybody's language, right? We've created ownership and engagement of frontline employees to results. And in their case, we leverage their powerful why. So for yourself, you have to also think, what is your why that's going to drive everybody? In this case, the secretary himself, in this case, came into the room with every single group that we did this with. We were able to expand upon that in the work that we did and facilitated. Their powerful why is they are building a nation. It's funded by the Asian Development Bank, and the reason why the Asian Development Bank funded this is because if they can do this well, this department has the ability to impact and influence lifting people out of poverty, which is a clear mandate of the Asian Development Bank, is to really tackle poverty. So how do you create and attract investment? You need to address corruption. You need to make sure that roads and infrastructure gets built that attracts investment. So these people, quite frankly, can see that they're building the prosperity of their entire nation. So their future generations of Filipino people are relying upon them to do a great job with this. And so that's a really powerful why that also gets them personally engaged and motivated. So I know I've used up pretty well all the time here, so I'm just going to say thank you at this point. If you have some questions just in respect of your time, what I'll maybe do is I'll reach out to you individually, and forgive me for making this kind of a complete monologue. I hope you appreciated that my focus was on value and content as opposed to something else. But I would like to see how you found this information, how you think you might be able to use it, how I might be able to help you, and certainly would like to answer any questions that you might have. So I'll stay on the line here for a little bit. If somebody does have a question, you can feel free to shout it out to me right away through the chat box. We've only got about 45 seconds here left. Otherwise, again, I look forward to speaking to each one of you individually. I thank you so much for investing the time today, and hope that we'll have a chance to maybe do some work and make some change and influence some things for the better going forward. Again, thank you so much for your time. Have a wonderful day.